My name is Emily, and at 30 years old, I find myself standing on the precipice of a reunion 5 years in the making. Tonight my family, a constellation of individuals I once orbited, now distant stars in my sky, will gather at Haven, the most celebrated new restaurant in Chicago, to toast my younger sister Clara's engagement. They believe I am still adrift, a culinary dreamer lost in a sea of impracticality, a footnote in the grand narrative of the Vance family legacy. They are unaware that the ground beneath their feet has shifted, that the world they so confidently navigate now includes a landmark built by the daughter they dismissed. A knot of apprehension tightens in my stomach as I smooth the lines of my simple silk dress. It is a curious truth that sometimes the most difficult reservations to secure are not at a table, but with the ghosts of one's own past. Growing up in the manicured enclave of Winnetka, Illinois, carried a certain weight, a specific set of expectations. The Vances were not merely wealthy, we were an institution. My parents, Alistair and Caroline Vance, had sculpted their lives and ours around the pillars of prestige. The right address on the North Shore, the right Ivy League degrees, the right careers in finance and law. Our sprawling Tudor home, with its manicured gardens sloping toward Lake Michigan, was less a home than a stage for my mother's social ambitions. At the fundraisers and garden parties she hosted, my siblings and I were presented like prized assets, our value measured by our proximity to her vision of success. The Vance children are poised for remarkable things, she would confide in her friends over glasses of chilled Chardonnay, my father nodding in stoic approval from behind his copy of the Wall Street Journal. Clara is a shoo-in for Harvard Law, and Julian shows such a remarkable aptitude for quantitative analysis. He'll be a natural on the trading floor. When the conversation inevitably turned to me, the quiet middle child, my mother's smile would become a masterpiece of strained politeness. Elara has artistic sensibilities. She is finding her own way. It was a gracefully worded epitaph for my perceived potential. What she meant was that I was the family's gentle, inexplicable disappointment. While Clara dominated the debate circuit and Julian brought home Math Olympiad trophies, my world was the kitchen, a sprawling sunlit space that was technically the domain of our housekeeper, Mrs. Rossi. A warm, no-nonsense woman from a small village near Bologna, Mrs. Rossi saw in me a flicker of understanding that my parents either couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge. "You have the touch, tesoro," she would murmur. Her hands dusted with flour as she showed me how to knead pasta dough until it felt like silk. "The way you smell the herbs, the way you taste the sauce, you feel the food in your soul." She spoke of food not as a task, but as a language of love and memory. By 13 I was devouring cookbooks like novels. By 16, I was orchestrating elaborate secret dinner parties for my friends whenever my parents were out of town. The kitchen became my sanctuary, the one place where the carefully constructed persona of Elara Vance could fall away, leaving only the girl who found her voice in the alchemy of heat and ingredients. "Cooking," my father had said, his voice laced with a gentle but firm incredulity when I first mentioned culinary school. "That is a noble craft, Elara, but Vances are patrons of the arts, not the artists themselves. We hire chefs. We do not become them." To maintain the fragile peace, I enrolled in the University of Chicago's prestigious business school, a path my father and grandfather had walked before me. But even amidst the theories of market economics and corporate strategy, I carved out a space for my true self. I took electives in food science and chemistry, justifying them as studies in supply chain management and product development. In my off-campus apartment, I ran an underground supper club, charging fellow students for innovative tasting menus, the profits from which funded secret weekend trips to New York and San Francisco for workshops with renowned chefs. This double life stretched into my postgraduate studies. I was 6 months into an MBA program that felt like a beautifully tailored but suffocating suit when the legendary Italian chef, Marco Vettori, visited the university for a guest lecture. After the event, at a reception I had helped cater, he sampled a small plate of my wild mushroom risotto. He sought me out later, his intense dark eyes studying me. "Who taught you to build layers of flavor like this?" he asked, his English accented with the melody of his native tongue. "I taught myself mostly," I admitted, my heart pounding. "From books, from Mrs. Rossi, from burning things until I got them right." He smiled, a rare, brilliant flash of warmth. He handed me his card, a simple, elegant piece of cream cardstock. You are wasting your spirit here. Come to my restaurant in New York. You have the gift. I will help you shape it. That conversation was the spark. 2 weeks later, I stood in my parents' formal living room, the air thick with the scent of lilies and unspoken disappointment, and announced that I was dropping out of my MBA program to enroll in culinary school and accept an apprenticeship with Chef Vettori. The silence that followed was heavier than any words. This is a profound miscalculation, Ilara, my father finally said, his voice quiet, which was always more unnerving than his anger. We have invested a great deal in your education. Everything except your belief in what I actually love, I countered, my voice shaking but firm. My mother's face, usually a mask of serene control, hardened. If you choose this diversion, you will do so without our support. Not financially, and not otherwise. Clara, home from her summer associate position at a top law firm, let out a short, cold laugh. Always the romantic, Ilara. Let's see how that pays the bills when you're dicing onions for minimum wage. Julian, already an analyst at a prestigious firm, simply looked away, his discomfort a tangible presence in the room. I walked out of that house with my personal savings, which amounted to just under $10,000, and a single suitcase. The next 5 years were a crucible. They were a blur of 18-hour days in kitchens hotter than any furnace, of living in a cramped Brooklyn apartment with 3 other aspiring chefs, of taking on student loans that felt like an anchor. But under Chef Vettori's demanding tutelage, I didn't just survive. I flourished. The intense discipline of the kitchen, the relentless pursuit of perfection, the pure, unadulterated creativity. It nourished a part of my soul that business school had left to starve. Then, an opportunity bloomed from the unlikeliest of soil. An investor, a quiet connoisseur who had dined at Vettori's and tasted a dish I had created for a special menu, approached me. 2 years ago, Haven opened its doors on a quiet street in River North, with me as the executive chef and a minority partner. The irony that my business school education had, in the end, been indispensable was not lost on me. 6 months ago, I secured a loan based on our spectacular success and bought out my partners, becoming the sole proprietor. Haven became the most sought-after reservation in Chicago. Last month, Gourmet Today ran a cover story on our philosophy, dubbing it the future of Midwestern cuisine. Throughout this whirlwind, I kept my family at arm's length. Our contact was limited to brief, stilted phone calls with my mother and the exchange of holiday cards. They knew I was working in a restaurant, a vague truth that allowed them to maintain their narrative of my gentle failure. I nurtured this quiet space between us intentionally. I needed my success to be mine, to be validated by my own hard work and the quiet satisfaction of a perfectly executed service, not by their eventual conditional approval. So when the heavy cream-colored invitation for Clara's engagement dinner arrived, I was stunned. The location, printed in elegant script, was even more shocking. Haven. Of course, they had no idea. They would have chosen it for its exclusivity, its burgeoning fame, the perfect backdrop for a Vance family celebration. After days of internal debate, I decided to accept. Not to gloat, not even to seek their validation, but perhaps to gently close a long and painful chapter. 5 years had given me a new kind of armor, a quiet confidence forged in fire and dedication. I was finally secure enough to face their judgment without fear of shattering. What I had not fully prepared for, however, was the profound and surreal pain of watching my own family sit in my sanctuary, my life's work, and unknowingly dissect the very creations that had saved me. But that was precisely what awaited me as I pushed open the heavy oak doors of Haven that evening, ready for one last time, to play the part of the prodigal daughter who had lost her way. The moment I stepped inside, the familiar symphony of Haven's evening service wrapped around me. The subtle brininess of the oyster bar, the rich, earthy scent of truffle oil, the clean, green perfume of fresh herbs from the vertical garden I'd had installed along the back wall. This aroma was usually my anchor, the scent of accomplishment. Tonight it felt like the prelude to a storm. I'd chosen my attire with the precision of plating a delicate dish. A simple ink blue silk dress that draped rather than clung, paired with a delicate silver locket that had belonged to my grandmother. It was an elegance of understatement, a quiet confidence they would almost certainly misinterpret as a sign of my limited means. My hair was pulled back in a soft, low chignon, a practical style for a chef, but one they would likely see as unadorned. Leo, my maitre d', a man whose calm demeanor could soothe the most frazzled diner, saw me instantly. His eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch in a silent question. I rarely entered through the front during service. I gave him a minute shake of my head and mouthed the word, "Guest." He understood immediately, his expression returning to one of seamless professionalism, as he turned his attention back to the bustling dining room. From the entrance I could see them. They had, of course, been given the best table in the house, a circular booth in the center of the room that offered both prominence and privacy. They were arranged like a living portrait of affluent contentment. My mother, Caroline, in a pearl gray Chanel suit. My father, Alistair, studying the wine list with an air of profound connoisseurship. Clara, luminous in a dress that shimmered under the carefully directed lighting. Beside her sat a man I presumed was Pierce, his dark hair slicked back, a watch on his wrist catching the light with every gesture. My brother, Julian, and his wife, Amelia, completed the tableau, their expressions a study in polite anticipation. Isabel, my hostess, approached with a soft smile. "Good evening, Ms. V." She caught herself with practiced grace. "Your party has been seated. May I show you to your table?" "Thank you, Isabel," I murmured, grateful for her discretion. As we walked toward the table, my mother's eyes found me. They performed the swift, comprehensive scan I knew from childhood, a mental inventory that assessed, evaluated, and invariably found some small fault. "Ilara," she said, rising to press a cool, perfumed cheek against mine. "You made it. We were beginning to worry." "I'm precisely on time, Mother," I replied, glancing at my watch. 8 o'clock, as the reservation stated. My father stood and gave me a brief, stiff hug that felt more like a formality than an embrace. "You look well, Ilara," he offered, which in the Vance lexicon meant I looked healthy but not fashionably thin. Clara offered her cheek without rising. "This is Pierce," she announced. Her fiancé stood, his handshake a fraction too firm, a classic assertion of dominance. "Yale undergrad, Kellogg MBA," he said by way of introduction. "Just made VP at JP Morgan." There was no "it's a pleasure to meet you," just a recitation of his pedigree. The Vance family's preferred currency. Julian's greeting was warmer, though his wife Amelia's smile seemed a little tight. I would learn later that she had been the one to spend weeks trying to secure this impossible reservation, and she was on edge, hoping it would live up to my mother's exacting standards. "Well," my mother said as I slid into the remaining seat, "we've taken the liberty of ordering a bottle of champagne. I trust that's acceptable." I glanced at the bottle chilling in the silver bucket beside the table. A grower champagne, one of my personal favorites, and the third most expensive on the list. A choice that signaled knowledge without appearing ostentatious. Very my mother. The restaurant hummed around us with the carefully orchestrated energy I had poured my soul into creating. The acoustics were designed to absorb excess noise, allowing for intimate conversation. The lighting, a warm golden glow, was angled to make both the food and the patrons look their best. The tables were spaced to create a sense of vibrant community without sacrificing privacy. Every single detail, from the weight of the silver to the custom-milled linen napkins, had been born from my imagination. I watched as my staff, a family forged in the fires of the kitchen, began to notice my presence. Marco, my sommelier, caught my eye as he approached with the champagne. A subtle flicker in his expression asked if he should acknowledge me. I gave an almost imperceptible shake of my head. "An excellent selection," he said to my father, presenting the bottle. "A superb choice to begin your celebration." "We're celebrating an engagement," my father announced, as if the entire restaurant needed to be aware of our importance. "Congratulations," Marco said smoothly. "Haven is honored to host such a wonderful occasion." "I'm impressed you managed to get a table," I said, my tone one of mild curiosity. "I've heard this place is booked solid for months." Pierce leaned forward, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "I have a contact. A partner at my firm knows the owner apparently. Pulled a few strings." I suppressed a smile. Pierce's contact was likely one of my angel investors, a man who occasionally asked for a table for a client. I made a mental note to send him a thank you gift. "You just have to know how to work the system," Pierce added with a wink. "How very resourceful of you," I murmured, raising the delicate flute to my lips as Marco finished pouring. To Clara and Pierce, my father toasted. A perfect union and a brilliant future. We all touched glasses. I took a small sip, the crisp, yeasty notes of the champagne a familiar comfort. It was served at the exact temperature I had dictated in our service manual, 52 degrees Fahrenheit. So, my mother began, her gaze settling on me like a spotlight. Do tell us what you've been doing with yourself, Ilara. You are always so wonderfully vague. The entire table turned their attention to me, a jury of 5, ready to hear my defense. I've been in the city, I said simply. Working hard. Learning. Still pursuing that cooking fancy? Clara sighed, as if I had confessed to a charming but ultimately juvenile hobby. I assumed you'd have found a more structured path by now. Not everyone is cut out for the corporate world, Julian offered, his attempt at defense sounding more like a gentle condemnation. Pierce looked at me with an expression of polite bewilderment. So what is it you do exactly? Are you a personal chef? Do you do catering? I've had a few different roles, I said, deliberately oblique. I wear many hats. Well, we're just pleased you seem to be managing, my mother said, her tone dripping with a magnanimity that felt like a pat on the head. Though you know our door is always open should you find yourself in need of assistance. Just then a server named Chloe, one of my most poised and intuitive team members, approached with the amuse-bouche. A single perfect Kumamoto oyster, resting on a bed of crushed ice, topped with a delicate mignonette foam and a single glistening pearl of dill oil. A small welcome from the kitchen, she announced, her voice a soft murmur as she placed one in front of each of us. Her eyes met mine for a fleeting second, a spark of shared understanding, before she retreated with silent grace. Is this it? Clara asked, peering at the single oyster with a look of disdain. I'm starving. It's an amuse-bouche, I explained patiently. It's meant to awaken the palate before the meal begins. I know what an amuse-bouche is, Ilara, she snapped. Just because I chose a career in law doesn't mean I'm uncultured. I watched as they each sampled my creation. My father, ever the pragmatist, dispatched his in one swift movement. My mother took a tentative bite, her lips pursed. Julian and Amelia seemed to genuinely savor it. Pierce made a great show of swirling it around his mouth as if tasting a fine wine, before pronouncing it interesting. Only Clara pushed hers aside. I don't care for oysters, she declared, though she had always loved them. As Chloe cleared the delicate plates, I saw the flicker of disappointment in her eyes at the untouched dish. In that moment a fierce protectiveness rose in me. Not for myself but for my team, for the collective pride we took in our work. I had built Haven not just as a business, but as a family, one bound by a shared passion that was deeper and more nourishing than the strained bonds of biology at my table. The evening was young, but the old, familiar roles were already being cast. I was the outsider, the dreamer, the one whose life required justification. But this time I sat at the table holding a secret, a quiet truth that would, before the night was over, rewrite the entire play. Tell us about the wedding plans, I said, gently steering the conversation back to Clara as our first course arrived. It was a dish I had spent weeks perfecting. A delicate carpaccio of candy-striped beets, arranged like rose petals, with a warm goat cheese mousse, toasted walnuts, and a 25-year-old balsamic vinegar I'd sourced from a family estate in Medina. Clara's mood brightened instantly. We've secured the Fourth Presbyterian Church, of course. And the reception will be at the Art Institute. We're expecting 400 guests, though Mother thinks the list is getting out of hand. Well, the Bradfords are simply not speaking to the Montgomerys after that fiasco at the charity regatta, so we can't possibly seat them at the same table, my mother lamented, launching into a complex social calculus that I found both baffling and strangely fascinating. 400 guests is a lot, I remarked, taking a bite of the beet carpaccio. The sweetness of the beet, the tang of the goat cheese, the richness of the nut. It was a harmony I had conducted. Pierce leaned forward conspiratorially. It's not just a wedding, it's a strategic merger. Half of those invitations are an investment in social capital. Precisely, my father agreed, nodding with approval. Pierce understands that a wedding of this caliber is about building a foundation for the future. And what about your future, Ilara? Clara asked, her tone suddenly sharpened to a fine point. Any prospects on the horizon? Or are your evenings still devoted to your pots and pans? I noticed she barely touched her food, instead using her fork to separate the beets from the goat cheese. I'm focused on my work right now, I replied. Work? Julian repeated, a small, almost apologetic smile on his face. Is that what you call it? My mother seized the opening. Alara, darling, you're 30 now. Surely it's time to think about settling down. I was just speaking with Eleanor Rothschild the other day, and her youngest son, the neurosurgeon, is recently single. Very stable. I'm not looking for a setup, mother. Well, you can't afford to be too selective, she persisted, her voice softening into a tone of faux concern. A woman in your position has to be realistic. Before I could formulate a reply, Chloe appeared to clear the first course. I had been so tense I'd barely tasted my own dish. Was everything to your satisfaction? She asked Clara, her eyes on the deconstructed plate. The balsamic was a bit overpowering, Clara said with a dismissive wave of her hand. And the beets were slightly under-roasted. I had to physically bite the inside of my cheek to keep from retorting. Those beets had been slow-roasted for 3 hours at a precise temperature to bring out their natural sweetness without losing their texture. I'm very sorry to hear that, madam, Chloe said, her voice a model of diplomatic grace. I will pass your feedback along to the kitchen. The second course was brought to the table. Seared diver scallops on a bed of creamy sunchoke puree, topped with a shard of crispy prosciutto and a drizzle of brown butter. It was a spring special, a dish that celebrated the fleeting season. Now this looks more substantial, my father declared, his approval immediate. Pierce swirled the Sancerre that Marco had recommended. The wine list here is adequate, he pronounced loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Not world-class but serviceable. Marco, who was refilling water glasses nearby, met my gaze with an expression of profound, shared amusement. He had been courted by 3-star Michelin restaurants in Paris and New York before I'd convinced him to join me in Chicago. So, Alara, Amelia began, making a valiant effort to be inclusive. Julian says you work in a restaurant, but you never say which one. Before I could answer, Clara jumped in. She's probably a hostess at one of those big chains on Michigan Avenue, right, Alara? Putting that business degree to good use, showing people to their tables. Actually, There's no shame in that, my father interrupted, his tone condescendingly paternal. A person has to start somewhere. Although after 5 years one would have hoped for a bit more trajectory. I have a trajectory, I said quietly. To what? Assistant manager at the Cheesecake Factory. Clara laughed. Clara, Julian said, his voice holding a note of warning. What? I'm simply being pragmatic. She made a choice to abandon a first-rate education for a whim. There are consequences to such choices. I took a sip of my wine, letting the cool mineral notes calm the rising frustration inside me. And how is your career, Clara? Did you make partner at Kirkland & Cole? Her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. I'm taking a sabbatical at the moment, to focus on the wedding plans. I insisted, Pierce interjected smoothly. My wife won't need to be working 80-hour weeks for someone else. She can dedicate her time to philanthropic work. Sit on a few charity boards like my mother does. I saw a flicker of something in Clara's eyes. Was it resignation? Or resentment? Before her serene mask slipped back into place, our third course arrived, a dish I was immensely proud of. Handmade agnolotti filled with ricotta and lemon zest, nestled in a brown butter and sage sauce, topped with shaved Parmigiano Reggiano. It was a dish that had been singled out for praise in the Gourmet Today feature. The portions are just theatrical, my mother sighed, gazing at the small, perfect pillows of pasta on her plate. One pays a fortune for a thimbleful of food. It's a tasting menu, mother, I explained. The idea is to experience a variety of small, perfect bites, not to gorge oneself. In my day, a fine restaurant left you feeling satisfied, not hungry, my father grumbled. I watched in silent horror as Pierce, instead of savoring the delicate pasta, took his fork and knife to it, cutting the agnolotti into crude, messy pieces. He was destroying something I had spent hours crafting by hand that very morning. So how are you affording this, Alara? Clara asked, her voice sharp and direct, abandoning all pretense. A dinner for one at this restaurant costs more than you likely make in a week. The hum of conversation at our table ceased. All eyes were on me. I'm careful with my money, I said, my voice even. Oh please, she scoffed. Are you living on credit cards? Did you take out a loan just to come here and impress us? Clara, Julian said again, his discomfort palpable. No, I'm curious, she insisted, leaning forward. We all cleared our schedules for this dinner at this incredibly exclusive place. I want to understand how the family member who threw her future away is suddenly dining at one of the most expensive spots in Chicago. The fourth course arrived before I could respond. A perfectly pan-seared duck breast, its skin rendered to a crispy golden brown, served with a cherry port reduction and a delicate parsnip gratin. Sophia, my chef de cuisine, had executed it flawlessly. This duck is raw, Pierce announced after a single bite. I glanced at his plate. The meat was a perfect medium rare, ruby red in the center, just as it should be. It's cooked to the correct temperature for duck breast, I explained. Any more and it becomes tough. I like my meat cooked through, he declared, waving a dismissive hand at the nearest server. When Chloe approached, he didn't even look at her. This is undercooked. Take it back to the kitchen and have them finish it. I saw the professional mask on Chloe's face tighten for a split second before she regained her composure. Of course, sir. My apologies. As she carried the plate away, she caught my eye, and I gave her a subtle nod. She knew this meant to have the kitchen fire a new breast, rather than destroying the perfect one he'd sent back by overcooking it. Honestly, Alara, my mother said as soon as Chloe was out of earshot, you still haven't given us a straight answer. How are you managing all of this? The tension at the table was now a physical presence, a suffocating weight on my chest. It was the same feeling I'd had at countless family dinners as a teenager. The feeling of being trapped in a witness box, cross-examined and judged. But I was not that girl anymore. I had built this room, this experience, this life. I was a sovereign in my own kingdom. I was on the verge of telling them everything, of letting the truth fall like a guillotine on their assumptions, when Pierce's well done, and now undoubtedly tough and dry duck breast was returned to him. Much better, he said with satisfaction, sawing at the meat. My father signaled to Marco. We'll have another bottle of wine. Something with more substance. He perused the list dramatically before pointing to a bottle of Barolo from a legendary vintage. It was priced at over $1,200. I had personally sourced that wine on a trip to Piedmont last fall, meeting the vintner and her family. It was a magnificent wine, but it was a sledgehammer to the delicate flavors of the remaining courses. May I suggest an alternative? I began. Perhaps something that would better complement the cheese course? My father waved a dismissive hand. I think I know my way around a wine list, Alara. Marco's eyes met mine, a silent question. I gave him the slightest of nods. Let him have his wine. This was not the battle. The war was yet to come. As the evening wore on through the cheese course and a deconstructed Black Forest cake for dessert, the subtle and not-so-subtle criticisms continued. Every dish was met with a minor complaint. Every attempt I made to engage was treated as the naive prattling of a child. By the time the coffee and digestives were served, I felt emotionally scoured. The dual weight of enduring their condescension, while simultaneously watching my life's work be so casually dismissed, was almost unbearable. And then came the moment of reckoning. The bill. Leo, my ever-discreet maitre d', approached the table and placed the handsome leather folder in the center. My father, by instinct, reached for it. But Pierce, ever the performer, intercepted it with a flourish. Please, Alistair. Allow me. My treat, to celebrate the happy couple. My father offered the requisite token protest before graciously conceding. I watched Pierce's face as he opened the folder. I saw his confident smile falter, then dissolve into a mask of barely concealed shock as his eyes scanned the total. Is something wrong? My father inquired. No, of course not, Pierce stammered, recovering quickly. Just a very thorough bill. I knew exactly what he was seeing. Dinner for 7, 2 bottles of premium champagne, the $1,200 Barolo, and after-dinner drinks. The total would be well over $4,000. He reached for his wallet, slowly extracting a black American Express card, ensuring everyone saw it. Clara, perhaps sensing his discomfort, used the moment to deliver what she likely thought was her final, winning blow. "So Ilara," she said, her voice dripping with syrupy concern. "You never did tell us how you plan to contribute to this little extravagance. We wouldn't want you to go into debt on our account." Once again the spotlight was on me. "I can cover my share," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Can you really?" she pressed, leaning in. "Because from where we're all sitting, it doesn't seem possible." The silence at the table was absolute. Her question was so pointed, so deliberately designed to humiliate, that even my mother looked uneasy. "Clara," my mother murmured, "that's not necessary." "No, I think it is," Clara insisted, her eyes locked on mine. "We've all sat here tonight and pretended that everything is fine, that Ilara's choices haven't led her to a precarious place. I think it's time for some honesty." A flush of heat spread across my skin. After 5 years of building, of struggling, of succeeding beyond my wildest dreams, I was right back where I started. The family disappointment being called to account for my choices. Pierce, seeing an opportunity to regain his footing after the shock of the bill, chimed in. "There's no shame in asking for help, Ilara. We can cover you." "I don't need you to cover me," I said, my voice tight. "Then how are you going to pay for it?" Clara demanded. "This meal costs more than your monthly rent, I'd imagine." I opened my mouth, the truth finally ready to be unleashed, when Pierce suddenly frowned at the bill again. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice loud with indignation. "There's a mistake here. They've only charged us for the beverages. The food hasn't been included." He motioned sharply for Leo. "Excuse me. There's a major error on this bill." Leo glided to our table, his timing impeccable. He had, I suspected, been observing this entire drama from a discreet distance. My entire staff had. "Is there a problem, sir?" he asked, his voice calm. "Yes, there's a problem," Pierce said, thrusting the folder at him. "You've forgotten to charge us for 7 tasting menus. That's a rather significant oversight." Leo glanced at the bill, then at me. His expression was a carefully blank slate, waiting for his cue. This was it. The curtain was about to rise. I gave him the barest, almost imperceptible nod. "There is no error, sir," Leo said, his voice clear and resonant in the quiet dining room. "The meal has been taken care of." "By whom?" my father demanded, his brow furrowed in confusion. Leo's professional mask finally fell away, replaced by a smile of genuine warmth and respect. He turned his body slightly, directing his attention fully to me. "The kitchen is ready for your tasting of the new summer menu whenever you are, Ms. Vance. And your investors have arrived. I've seated them in the private dining room with a bottle of the 98 Krug you requested." The silence that descended upon the table was a physical thing. A sudden drop in atmospheric pressure. 6 pairs of eyes swiveled to me, their expressions a kaleidoscope of shock, confusion, and dawning impossible comprehension. "Thank you, Leo," I said, my voice steady despite the wild thrumming in my veins. "Please close out Mr. Harrington's beverage tab. The rest, as always, is on the house." "Of course, Ms. Vance," he replied, taking the leather folder from Pierce's limp, unresisting hand. "Chef Sophia also asked me to remind you about the interview with the Times tomorrow morning." "I haven't forgotten," I assured him. As Leo walked away, I finally allowed my gaze to sweep across the stunned faces of my family. My mother's hand was at her throat, her perfectly applied lipstick suddenly looking garish against her pale skin. "Ilara, what is happening?" I took a slow, deep breath, letting the moment hang in the air. The power dynamic of my entire life had just been irrevocably altered. "Welcome to Haven," I said, my voice soft but clear. "My restaurant." The silence that followed was so profound I could hear the faint clinking of glasses from the bar across the room. It was my father who spoke first, his voice stripped of its usual booming confidence, replaced by a cautious, measured tone. "Your restaurant? You mean you're the manager here?" "No, father," I said, a strange sense of calm washing over me. The storm had broken. "I own it. I'm the executive chef and sole proprietor." "That's not possible," Clara blurted out, her face a mask of disbelief. "This is Haven. This is one of the most acclaimed restaurants in the country. It was on the cover of Gourmet today." "Yes, it was," I confirmed. "And we received 2 Michelin stars in the last guide." The first female-owned, female-run kitchen in Chicago to do so. Pierce was staring at me as if I had just sprouted wings. But you were so vague. You said you wore many hats. Because for one night, just one night, I wanted to see you. I said, my gaze moving from face to face. Not your perception of my success or failure. Just me. And you all showed me exactly what you see when you look at me. My mother's hand fluttered to her pearls, her signature gesture when her carefully curated world was tilting off its axis. Darling, why on earth would you keep something so monumental a secret from your own family? The way she said monumental was telling. My passion was only validated now that it came with a price tag and prestige. Would you like to know? I asked and continued without waiting for an answer. After I left home, I moved to a tiny room in a shared apartment in Pilsen. For 2 years I worked 16-hour days. I was a prep cook at a diner from 5 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Then I'd take the L to a bistro in Lincoln Park and work the line until midnight. I took out loans for culinary school. I had burns on my arms that never seemed to heal, and my hands were perpetually raw from washing dishes and chopping vegetables. I took a sip of water, my eyes never leaving theirs. Julian was watching me with an expression of dawning respect. Amelia looked horrified on my behalf. My parents seemed frozen, processing a reality that was completely alien to them. Chef Vettori took me under his wing. I became his sous chef. A few years ago, I was running a private dinner for him. A guest, a venture capitalist named Eleanor Croft, tasted a dish I'd created. She asked to meet the chef who made it. I gestured to the room around us. Eleanor was my first backer. We found this space. It was a derelict warehouse. I drew up the business plan, designed the kitchen, developed every single recipe, hired every member of my staff, and chose every plate, every glass, every chair you're sitting on. But the capital required, my father said, his banker's mind grappling with the numbers. An undertaking of this scale must have cost millions. Our initial funding was $2.8 million, I confirmed. Eleanor brought in 2 other silent partners. We were profitable within 6 months. A year ago, I leveraged our success to secure a business loan and bought them all out. Haven is mine, free and clear. So you knew we were coming here, Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. No, actually. Amelia made the reservation. Isn't that right, Amelia? I asked, turning to my sister-in-law. Amelia blushed. Yes. I had no idea, Lara. The concierge at Julian's firm said it was the best restaurant in the city. I swear. I know you didn't, I said gently. No one knew. That was the point. But why the secrecy? My mother pleaded. We are your family. We would have been so proud. A humorless laugh escaped my lips. Would you have been? Are you the same family that told me cooking was a craft for servants? The family that cut me off when I chose passion over prestige? The family that just spent the last 3 hours pitying me for my fancy? My father cleared his throat. Now, Ilara, that's not entirely fair. We were concerned for your welfare, for your future. Had we known you possessed this kind of entrepreneurial drive. That is precisely it, I said, my voice rising with an emotion I could no longer contain. It's the drive you respect, the success, not the passion. My love for this, for the food, for the craft, that wasn't enough for you. It only has value in your eyes now that it's been stamped with the approval of Michelin and Gourmet today. At that moment, as if on cue, my chef de cuisine, Sophia Reyes, appeared at the table. She was a powerhouse, a brilliant chef I had recruited from a top restaurant in Mexico City. Ilara, sorry to interrupt, she said, her presence radiating calm authority. The table of food critics from New York has arrived. They're asking if you can come say hello. And your publisher's assistant called to confirm the final manuscript deadline for the cookbook. The word hung in the air. Cookbook? Julian echoed, looking amazed. It's called Haven, I said, turning back to my family. It's being published by Clarkson Potter in the fall. Ilara, my mother began, her voice taking on a frantic, placating tone. This is all just so overwhelming. We must celebrate this properly. We can host a party for you at the club. The way you celebrated my choice to pursue this in the first place? I asked quietly. With silence and disapproval? We thought it was a phase, my father protested weakly. How could we have known it would lead to this? You have my head for business, clearly. I felt a flash of hot anger at his attempt to co-opt my victory. I built this with my own 2 hands, I said, my voice low and fierce. On my own terms. Without your money, your connections, or your permission. Pierce, who had been uncharacteristically silent, suddenly saw a new angle. A cookbook deal. And this place must be generating incredible revenue. Alara, have you considered franchising the concept? A second location in New York or LA? My group has a strong portfolio in hospitality ventures. I could make some introductions. I cut him off with a look. I'm quite happy with my current team of advisors, thank you, Pierce. Clara shot him an irritated glance before turning back to me. Her own expression a complex mixture of humiliation and awe. So all this time, while we thought you were barely getting by, you were building an empire. I was building a life, I corrected her. My life. And you let us sit here tonight, she continued, her voice hardening with defensiveness. You let us criticize your food, your restaurant, you let us mock you. I didn't let you do anything, I said. I simply created a space for your true feelings to show themselves. And they did. The main dining room had emptied now, the last of the patrons drifting out into the cool Chicago night. Leo approached with a tray bearing a single crystal snifter of amber liquid. Your 20-year-old Armagnac, Miss Vance. For your meeting. Thank you, Leo, I said. I rose from my seat, the silk of my dress rustling in the quiet room. I have to go. My investors are waiting. Alara, wait, my mother said, standing abruptly. Don't leave like this. We need to talk. I looked at the 5 of them, frozen in their tableau of shock and regret. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or resentment. I just felt a quiet, sad sense of distance. I agree. We have a lot to talk about, I said. But it will have to be another time. And on new terms. I turned to walk toward the private dining room, toward my future, leaving them sitting at a table in my past. I had taken perhaps 10 steps when I heard my sister's voice, small and uncertain. Alara. I paused and looked back. The duck, she said, a faint blush on her cheeks. It was perfect. I gave her a small, sad smile and then continued on my way, the warmth of the Armagnac snifter in my hand a grounding presence. The kitchen door swung open before me, and the familiar, beloved chaos of the end of a service washed over me. This was my haven. I was home. In the weeks that followed, a fragile and unfamiliar quiet settled over my relationship with my family. The explosive revelation at Haven had shattered the old dynamics, and we were all left navigating the pieces, unsure how to reassemble them. The brunch I had suggested took place the following Sunday. I chose a small, bustling taqueria in Pilsen, a place with plastic tablecloths and the best cochinita pibil in the city. My parents were visibly out of their element, but to their credit they tried. My father, after a moment of hesitation, devoured his tacos with a genuine, unforced appreciation. My mother asked the owner about the source of her heirloom corn. It was a start. The calls from my mother became more frequent, her conversations less about social calendars and more about my actual life. She asked about supply chain issues, about the challenges of managing staff, about the creative process behind a new dish. She was trying to learn the language of my world. My father, in his own way, was doing the same. He began emailing me articles from business journals about restaurant finance and hospitality trends, his version of an olive branch. Clara was the most changed. The wedding planning, she confessed over coffee one afternoon, had become a cage of others' expectations. Her sabbatical from law was, in fact, an indefinite leave after she'd been passed over for a promotion she'd worked tirelessly to earn. I was doing everything I was supposed to do, she'd said, staring into her latte. I had the right degree, the right firm, the right fiancé, and I was miserable. And then I saw you and you had thrown away all the right things and you had built something real. It made me feel envious and ashamed. Our conversations became a new kind of foundation, one built not on sibling rivalry, but on a shared, belated understanding of the pressures we had both faced. A month later, she called off her engagement to Pierce. It was a messy public affair within their social circle, but for the first time in years, I saw a light of genuine freedom in my sister's eyes. She re-enrolled in a master's program, not in law but in art history, a passion she had suppressed since she was a teenager. I hosted her engagement party, now a celebration of new beginnings party, at Haven. The restaurant was closed to the public for the night. My family gathered not as critics or judges, but as guests in my world. Julian brought his children, their eyes wide with wonder as I gave them a tour of the gleaming stainless steel kitchen. My father stood talking with Sophia for nearly an hour, genuinely fascinated by her culinary philosophy. My mother helped me place flowers on the tables, her touch gentle and collaborative. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing on the small terrace I'd built off the back of the dining room, looking out at the glittering Chicago skyline. My father came to stand beside me. "I was wrong, Alara," he said quietly, not looking at me but at the city. "For years I saw your passion as a liability. I failed to see it was your greatest asset. That's a failure of vision on my part. A bad investment." "It's okay, Dad," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. The anger had faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance. "No, it's not," he said. "But I hope it's not too late to reinvest." He finally turned to me, his eyes clearer than I had seen them in years. "I'm proud of you. Not because of the Michelin stars or the money, but because you had the courage to build a life on your own terms. That's a braver thing than I ever did." A single tear traced a path down my cheek, a release of pressure I hadn't known I was still holding. It wasn't the grand validation I might have fantasized about as a hurt young woman, but something far more meaningful. A simple, honest acknowledgement between two people who were finally beginning to see each other clearly. Later, long after the last guest had departed and the staff had gone home, I sat alone at my favorite table, a small two-top in a quiet corner of the dining room. My cookbook manuscript lay open before me, the introduction page still blank. For months I had struggled to find the right words. But now, in the stillness of my sanctuary, they began to flow. I picked up my pen and wrote, "We are taught to seek recipes for life, to follow instructions that promise a predictable and successful outcome. For years I believed my ingredients were wrong, that my palate was unsuited for the menu my family had planned for me. This book is not about following recipes. It is about learning to trust your own senses. It's about understanding that sometimes the most beautiful flavors come from ingredients others discard, and that the most nourishing meals are the ones we create for ourselves, in kitchens we build with our own hands." This is a story about food, yes. But more than that, it is a story about finding the courage to cook without a recipe, and in doing so discovering a feast you never knew was possible. I set my pen down, a sense of profound peace settling over me. The journey had not been about proving my family wrong. It had been about proving my own intuition right. The approval I had won was not theirs but my own. And I knew, with a certainty that was as deep and satisfying as the most perfectly balanced dish, that it was the only approval I would ever truly need. Have you ever found yourself at a crossroads between the path others have chosen for you and the one your heart knows is your own? I would be honored to hear your stories of the journeys you've taken. Perhaps in sharing we can all feel a little less alone on the path. The greatest successes, I have learned, are not measured by public accolades, but by the quiet internal peace that comes from living a life that is authentically, unapologetically your own.